Chapter 14. The Ambassadors of the Abaka. So it was that Halima of Calais became a prisoner in her own kingdom. The servants who attended her now spoke only in the hissing whispers of the people of the snake. She was again overtaken with searing loneliness. She missed Shamari and her stepson Kakoi. She missed her friends, the servant Nima, and the loyal bodyguard Madango. She had little to do but look out from the window of the stone tower, out across the placid sea. She dreamed that her husband Shamari, lord of the Abaka, the great ones of the mountain, would come for her, that his triumphant armies would march through the broad streets of Calais, and he would slay the beast Alagbadi and free her. In reality, the war had reached a standstill. The forces of Alagbadi and his allies had blazed their way to the very foot of the Silver Mountain, but still they could not discover, even with all their scouts and spies and intrigue, the secret path through the rambling fields of bamboo and the maze of narrow crevices that led up the mountain. Again and again, Masamakalai and Alagbadi's other generals questioned Halima for the secret, but she swore to them that she had been blindfolded, going up and down the mountain. In truth, of course, when she and Kakoi climbed down the mountain, they came straight through the secret pass, but nothing could ever make her reveal that. Halima lay in bed, feeling the gentle curve of her belly, which now subtly grew with every passing week. As she lay half asleep on a blanket of soft lion fur, a servant appeared over her and sharply told her to dress. "I will not be bullied," Halima retorted, rolling onto her belly with a frown. The servant told her, "A party has arrived from the Abaka, ambassadors suing for peace. The king would have you at his side to greet them." Halima hurriedly dressed in a long linen skirt, and a guard escorted her to King Alagbadi's receiving hall. He sat on her father's golden throne, fully decked out in his kingly regalia, holding the royal scepter in his hand. Halima took her place silently at his side. It had been weeks since they spoke last. He glanced at her hips, widening now, and at her bust, which was swelling up like a water-filled gourd. "Our cook's dishes agree with you, Halima," he said with a sly smile. "I'm glad you're not wasting away in sorrow." An ivory horn blew now, trumpeting the arrival of the visitors from the Silver Mountain, the land of the giants. Halima felt herself trembling like a maiden on her wedding night. It was ridiculous to think for a moment that her true husband, Shamari, would be among the party. In a time of war, what nation would send its Nakamba, war leader, as an ambassador? It was true that by all law and honored tradition, the persons of such ambassadors were held to be sacred and inviolate, but no country would tempt fate in such a way. Yet still she trembled. Now 9 men marched into the great hall, past the gauntlet of 100 spear-toting palace guards. They were giants all, of proud bearing. She had been away from the land of the Abaka so long that the chiseled features of the men seemed identical. Every one of them reminded her of Shamari, her beloved. All of them wore the stately white robes and turbans of ambassadors. Halima recognized their leader. It was the venerable Watande, head of the Council of Elders. The gray-bearded old man addressed Alagbadi. "Noble Alagbadi, whom men call Alagbadi the Trustworthy, King of the people of the Snake, Master of Calais and of the ocean, we greet you." As the old man spoke, Halima let her attention wander among the strong-jawed faces of the warriors of the Abaka. Her eyes settled on the very last of them, the tallest of the men. He was boldly returning her stare. His eyes were fierce and hot, and before them Halima's heart melted. She felt her knees buckling under her as if they had turned to butter. She had to grip Alagbadi's shoulder to keep from toppling, and stood swaying. "Shamari!" The words of old Watende barely registered in her brain as he continued to praise Alagbadi. "Your sons have fought valiantly against us, and they have earned much honor. Many of the mightiest of the Abaka have fallen, but enough blood has been shed from this young generation. There are enough widows. Let us put an end to the killing. Halima looked at Shamari, who stood silently in the back. He wore no kingly emblem or war leader's headdress. Has he come all this way to see me? She wondered. Alagbadi listened patiently to the ambassador's speech, and a boyish smile appeared on his plump features. When the old man finished, the king sat forward, considering their group, and stroking his fleshy triple chin. Then abruptly he clapped his hands. All around the room spears leapt to the ready in the hands of the warriors of the people of the snake. The party of the Abaka drew instinctively into a circle. Alagbadi turned to his slave general Masamakalai. Take these ruffians and bind them. As the palace guards converged on the visitors, Shamari pointed angrily at Alagbadi. Villain! He bellowed. He started toward Alagbadi's throne, but a sharp spear poking his belly stopped him in his tracks. He stood there helplessly, as his arms were yanked behind his back and thick ropes were wrapped around him. Halima turned to Alagbadi in horror. You foul, slithering snake! You've defecated on the throne of my father! King Alagbadi gave her a stinging blow across the face. Go to your room, or you'll be taken with your friends to the darkest dungeon. Halima stood helplessly, watching the guards wrestle proud Shamari and bind the king of the Abaka like a calf for the slaughter. All the while, his black eyes were fixed upon her. She wanted to call out to him, but to let Alagbadi know that this was the war leader of all the Abaka would seal his fate. With great effort, she held her tongue and backed away, thinking, Oh, my love, who has traveled so far and risked so much to find me, I will save you. So the cunning and treacherous King Alagbadi chained the party that came to make peace with him. He ordered Masamakalai to torture them and by any means extract the secret to the pass to the mountains. Halima, herself imprisoned in her bedchamber, was a wreck. She paced like a caged animal in the room, wringing her hands, helpless to aid her true husband. 3 days passed, and on the 3rd day, Wendepele came with news. Only he was allowed to see her now, for to the people of the snake he was but an old fool, a jester to entertain the royals with amusing stories and songs. What have you learned? Halima demanded. The face of her father's griot was drained of blood. Sadly he told her, The 9 ambassadors of the Mbaka have each in turn been tortured. Gruesome tortures of the people of the snake, cruelties inflicted too vile for your ears. But not one has betrayed the secret. Not one has cried out in pain. Already the elder is dead. I must see Shamari. Wendepele shook his head. Impossible, my queen. Halima took him by his frail shoulders. Friend of my father, I must see him. To slip past the guard posted at the entrance to her chambers, Halima dressed as a servant girl, donning a veil to disguise her features. Deep into the tunnels beneath the palace, pathways hewn in the stone in antiquity by underground streams running to the sea, Halima and the old griot wandered until they reached the dungeons where the prisoners were kept. A pair of burly guards with shoulders as broad as water buffaloes stood at the doors. Wendepele told the men, This young girl says these giants raided her village, killed her parents, and violated her. The guards scrutinized Halima. She wants only the chance to spit in the face of her attacker. If she were your sister, would you not grant her that small revenge? The bigger guard frowned. There's not much left to spit upon. Halima shuddered. The guard threw back a huge bolt and let the door creak open. Halima glanced apprehensively at Wendepele, then ducked into the black chamber. The cold, dank room stank of sweat and mildew and stale blood. Halima shivered as she stepped forward, unable to see in the darkness. Then there was a sickening smack as she collided with flesh. She heard the rattle of chains, like the death rattle, and scuttled back. Shamari! She cried in anguish. The guard came into the chamber, carrying a torch and throwing a garish light onto the form of a giant who hung upside down by chains from his ankles. his mouth hanging open, black pits where his eyes had been gouged out, and his manhood lopped off. Halima spun and buried her face into the griot's breast. "Shamari! Shamari!" she cried in anguish. "Is that the coward who attacked you?" the guard asked. He punched the corpse casually. Halima thought bitterly of the proverb, "What is said over the dead lion's body could not be said to him alive." Old Mwendepele turned Halima gently so that she faced the dead giant again. "Is it he?" he whispered. Halima forced herself to look at the face, and saw that, although the slain warrior had a chiseled visage like that of her beloved husband, it was not Shamari. Her heart began to beat again. "This is not the one," she replied. Weak-kneed, she moved on into the room. The harsh light cast by the guard's torch fell on the faces of other men. All were dead, except the last, the strongest, who still clung to life. Shamari hung naked from the chains, his broad chest crisscrossed with open, bleeding wounds, his head lolled to one side like part of a broken doll. Tears began to stream from Halima's eyes. "Oh, dear husband, what have those jackals done to you?" Her husband seemed to sense her presence. He stiffened suddenly and groaned as consciousness returned to him. His eyes fluttered open, and as he saw her, a smile appeared on his parched, puffy lips. Halima stepped close to him, and in the melodious tongue of the people of the mountain, she said, "My darling, foolish love, why did you come here?" The king of the giants whispered, "I could not live without seeing you again, Halima." Halima was nearly blinded by tears now. "Oh, my beloved," she whispered. Shamari smiled painfully, his black eyes full of warmth. "It seems it is true what the old ones say. He who marries beauty marries trouble." The big guard frowned. "I thought she came to spit on him." The griot told him, "She is cursing him and rebuking him for his crime against her." "It doesn't sound like a curse to me. Sounds like the honey talk of lovers," the guard said suspiciously. Shamari hoarsely ordered his wife, "Go on, spit upon me, wife." Halima shook her head violently. "Yes," he insisted, "among us that is a sign of blessing, like the gentle falling rain." Halima felt her throat drying up, an empty well. Behind her, the suspicious guard took a step forward and grabbed her arm, but Halima tore away. She threw back her fist and landed a blow in the middle of her husband's chest, so that he swung back like a punching bag. Then she followed by pummeling him, spluttering in her own language every angry curse she knew. She grabbed hold of Shamari, wrapping her arms around him and burying her face against him, holding him. Both Mwendepele and the guard had to use all their strength to wrestle her away. In the language of the Abaka, as they dragged her away, she cried to him, "I will save you, husband." Halima immediately sought an audience with the king, Alagbadi. When she entered his private chambers, he was studying a map with his general, Masamakalai. On the parchment, little pieces of stone of different colors sat, representing his various armies and those of his adversary. His expression was so studious that for the first time he seemed to Halima like a real king, not simply a primping peacock. She got straight to the point. "I wish to free the last of the Abaka ambassadors." Alagbadi raised his eyebrows mockingly. "Our enemies, my queen?" "I will tell you what he will never tell you, no matter how much you torture him. I will tell you where the path through the mountains to the kingdom of the Abaka lies." Alagbadi's eyes narrowed into cat-like slits, and a smile appeared. He glanced at his three-fingered henchman. Halima went on firmly, "In return, you will free the Abaka." King Alagbadi spun, turning his back on her, and chuckled with joy. Then he faced her, wearing a look of triumph. "I accept your bargain, Halima, with one additional condition." Halima grimaced in anticipation. "You must give yourself to me," the king said with a gleam in his eyes. Halima looked down at the stone floor, then steeled herself and nodded morosely. Body held up his index finger. "That is not enough," he said, his voice lowering. "I must see you stripped before me, on your knees, begging for my love." Halima looked at him, nostrils flaring, blood rushing to her cheeks. The pig! Sternly, Body pressed on. "Or do you prefer to see your Abaka lover unmanned and die a shrieking eunuch?" Halima met his eyes coolly. "I will do as you wish." Massa Macaulay grinned a crocodile's sharp-toothed grin. "There is no shame in it, girl. A cow must graze where it is tied." Body looked like a fat little boy with a jar of honey. "Master Macaulay, the map!" he cried. The slave general strode over with the map and laid it out in front of Halima. Halima felt a torrent of emotion sweep over her. Again she felt as if she were in the river, rushing toward the great falls. In her mind's eye she saw the peaceful mountain city and the magnificent clouds rolling overhead. She remembered the cruel words of the seer, the old man of the mountain, who warned Shamari that she would, for love, some day betray the Abaka. But beneath this clamor of thoughts rang one clear notion. She would save her husband, Shamari. She pointed to the pass on the map. Massa Macaulay blew up. "The Kalian bitch lies, my lord. Our spies have searched that area. All that's there is an impassable thicket of prickly nyika bushes and bamboo." Body looked sharply at Halima. She shot Massa Macaulay a contemptuous glance. "Beyond those thorns is the pass," she said. "If you had the courage, you would have found it." Massa Macaulay scowled. Body clapped his palms together in glee. "Prepare our armies to march within 7 days, Massa Macaulay." "Yes, Highness." He hesitated, as if reluctant to leave. Then he hurried out of the chamber. Halima demanded, "And now you will free the Abaka." "You forget. You have yet to meet the final condition." Halima turned to go. "I will prepare myself." Body blocked her path and stood there, his fists on his chubby hips. "I want you as you are now, proud one," he said huskily. "I want your smells, not some perfume from the bark of a tree or the glands of an animal." Halima looked away, biting back her anger. She unfastened her dress and let it fall. She unwrapped her headdress and peeled off her silk loincloth, so that she stood naked before Body. She stepped toward the monarch, but he stayed her with a raised hand. "Remember?" Halima nodded stiffly and forced herself to her knees before Body. Head bowed, she mumbled, "King Body, the trustworthy, my lord and master, I kneel before you as less than your slave, as a supplicant before God. I am an empty vessel. I beg for you to take me and fill me." Afterward, Body lay on top of Halima, panting, his fat gut pressed against her gently rounded tummy. She was drenched in his sweat, which smelled of cooked pig fat. He embraced her and gasped in her ear, "I've loved 300 women in my day, and none like you. I knew you and I were a pair from the moment I laid my eyes on you. That underneath all that pride was a creature of the jungle. These other women, they make love to have children, to take care of them in old age when they're sagging crones. But you burn as I burn." He caressed her belly. "Oh, I love you, Halima. I want you to bear my sons. I know you have one here, but do not fear. He will not go to the sword. I will rear him as my own. He will be raised in the way of the snake, and he will be the second Body." Halima said nothing, but for the first time he looked in her eyes and saw the revulsion that was there. He choked with exasperation. "Am I such an ogre?" He took her soft shoulders and shook them. "Do you really hate me so? Are you so much in love with that Abaka? Halima shut her eyes. Body climbed to his feet, clutching his robe around him with stiff dignity. He said with a mirthless smile, "At least admit you enjoyed our love-making." Halima sat expressionless. Body shook with anger and shame, as if he were the one who'd been violated. He stomped to the door and threw it open. "Master Macaulay!" he hollered. Halima sat up slowly. "What of the Abaka?" she called. "You gave your word." Master Macaulay arrived at the doorway. Body told him, "Have the guards keep her here, and have the Abaka put to death." "No!" Halima screamed. You gave your word." Body turned his back to her. His shoulders rose and fell as he sighed deeply. Then he added, "See that he does not stuff her." He strode out of the chamber, shutting the door behind him. Halima lay on the floor of the chamber, weeping, curled up like a fetus. Shame overcome her as she thought of how she had allowed Body to defile her flesh, all in vain. For her husband was still to perish, and there was nothing that could be done to stop it. All his people were doomed as well because of her. She shook, weeping like a child. She pined for her mother, her father, her great-aunt Bimkubwa to hold her, and for the foul stink of Body to wash away. Then a gentle hand, the strong hand of a man, touched her bare shoulder. Halima looked up, startled. She was astounded to see before her the face of Madango, the sword-bearer of her father. She almost cried out in surprise, then embraced him, huddling against his broad chest. She ran her hands over his gleaming bald head. "How did you get here?" she gasped in astonishment. "Are you Madango in truth, or the ghost of Madango?" He pointed to an opening in the wall of the king's chamber. "There are hidden passages in the palace running clear to the sea. The knowledge of the tunnels was entrusted only to the most loyal of your father's palace guards," he explained. "I thought you were dead, dear friend," Halima said as she fixed her dress modestly about her. "When Nima and I returned to Kali, we learned Body had seized the throne. We feared for our lives and went into hiding in Nima's village." "Why did you come?" Halima asked. "Word came that you are a prisoner. At the sea, I have a small boat waiting to rescue you." Halima embraced him gratefully. He looked unchanged, his bald head glistening and powerful body bare except for a fisherman's loincloth. "Oh, Madango, you know I am a princess no more, but only a powerless wretch. And yet you came for me." Madango raised his sword arm. "For 180 years, my fathers have served yours. While I breathe, this arm is yours. And never have I needed it more, friend." To her chambers, Halima quickly summoned Mandepali and told him to take 2 servants and begin the journey to the Silver Mountain. He was to warn the leaders of the Abaka that an army of King Body was on the way. "Tell them to wait in ambush in all their numbers in the hidden pass, and there to destroy his armies in one blow," she commanded. Do you wish me to join the Abaka in battle?" the old man queried hesitantly. "I have not held a weapon in many years, in truth never." "It is not your battle, friend of my father," Halima told him. "I want you to live a long time, so you may teach my son the wisdom of our ancestors." She kissed him gently on the forehead and sped him on his way. She and the iron-thewed Madango set off into the secret passageway from the king's chamber to find the dungeon where her husband Shamari was a prisoner facing death. They clambered through the pitch-black tunnel, squeezing through the narrow passageways. In front of her, the broad-shouldered warrior had an even rougher time negotiating the corridors. She heard dust crumbling away as he forced his way through. Halima's heart pounded furiously. They were moving so slowly, and each moment brought her husband closer to death. She cursed herself for the minutes she had wasted with Mwendepeli, but she knew her husband would not wish her to live if his people were destroyed. At last she saw a glow up ahead. Madango stepped out into a hall and then pulled her after him. The torchlit hall, though scarcely wide enough to accommodate 2 average-sized men at once, was like a wide valley now, compared to the secret passage through which they'd been scrabbling. They hurried along toward the prison cell. "Beware of the guard, faithful M'Dongo," Halima whispered. M'Dongo craned his neck cautiously around the corner, then crept on leopard feet into the hall to the cell. Halima followed on tiptoes. The hall was empty now. The door to Shamari's cell was unguarded. Halima felt her jaw clench tightly. Why would they have left the cell unguarded? Unless there was no one alive to guard. They approached the cell door solemnly. It stood unbolted. Taking a torch from a bronze holder in the hall, M'Dongo nudged the door, and it swung creaking open. Halima covered her nose. The chamber smelled of rot and death. And yet the room was empty now. The hacked-up carcasses of the giants had been hauled away. Except for a solitary figure which lay on a slab in the middle of the room, arms crossed, covered by a white shroud. Halima felt her knees begin to give way beneath her. M'Dongo strode to the slab, on which a single goblet sat. The goblet was decorated by twisting, intertwined serpents, their fangs bared. He picked up the cup, sniffed it, and winced, then hurled it away. "For killing elephants," he muttered. He leaned forward and pulled back the shroud. Halima saw the face of her husband, Shamari, blue-black, frozen in a grimace, his eyes open and gazing at eternity. Halima dropped to her knees. Feverish prayers rushed from her lips. "Mother, Father, all my kin who dwell in the shadows, I plead with you, do not let this be so. Do not let my husband be swallowed by the abyss. Send him back to me, I beg you." As Halima continued to plead and weep, her body convulsing like one with a fever, M'Dongo rested his ear against the giant's breast, then solemnly rose. He put his fingers to Shamari's throat and almost shivered at the coldness. Finally he put one hand over the mouth of Shamari and felt not one hint of breath. He turned to Halima. "Princess, I am sorry. We must go now, before you are missed." Then he began to pull the shroud up over the body. "No, no, no!" Halima shrieked. "It cannot be! It cannot be!" M'Dongo started toward her comfortingly, as she shut her eyes, threw back her head, and let out a piercing scream, like a female baboon whose mate has been slaughtered by hunters. M'Dongo nervously clapped his broad hand over her mouth. Then, from under the shroud, an arm fell. Halima jabbered with excitement, muffled by M'Dongo's hand, and pointed to Shamari's fingers, which twitched once, then twice. Halima leapt to her feet and rushed to her husband's side. She ripped the shroud away. His eyes were shut now, clenched as if from horrible pain. "He is alive!" she cried in joy. M'Dongo was beside her in an instant. "It will take a great physician to save him." "You have doctors in Nima's village?" "Yes, Princess," M'Dongo said, "but there is little time." "Lift him," she ordered. M'Dongo heaved and moaned as he hurried through the tunnel toward the sea with the giant over his shoulder. It was like watching an ant carry a huge crumb of bread. Halima scurried along behind, sloshing through water that swirled around her ankles. Here the stones were smooth, damp, and cold. The rank odor of rotting seaweed filled her nostrils. "The tide is coming in," M'Dongo warned her, panting. Indeed, just a few moments later they were waist-deep in the frigid sea-water. Halima tenderly held the head of her husband so that it did not sink beneath the water. M'Dongo was struggling under the great weight of the giant now. Chest heaving, he slowed to a halt and leaned against the slick stone wall of the secret tunnel. "Princess, I must rest," he murmured. "The water is rising, M'Dongo," Halima reminded him. It was lapping at her navel now. "I cannot bear him," he confessed. "He is like a tree." Halima splashed close to the warrior and looked him in the eyes with ferocity. "Do you truly love me, M'Dongo?" He bowed his head. "Yes, you know it." "Then you must save him, for he is my true heart." M'Dongo nodded painfully. She took the giant's legs. "Go on now," she ordered. Together they waded, lurching through the water. They were knee-deep in sea-water when at last light appeared at the end of the tunnel. Halima was gasping for breath, inching forward on tiptoes, trying to keep her nostrils above water. "I have him, Princess," Madongo shouted. "Swim for the boat." Reluctantly, Halima released her grip on her husband's legs and let her feet rise from the slippery floor of the tunnel. Thrusting out arm after arm, she swam through the mouth of the tunnel out to the sea. Huge waves crashed against the jagged rocks around her, battering her and spinning her about. But she forged ahead, drinking in as little of the sea water as she could. Just ahead, she saw a small sailboat made of reeds lashed together with coconut rope. A sinewy old man was at the helm, fighting the waves and paddling furiously with a long oar. The boat spun about like a toy spiraling down a drain. Choking and spluttering, Halima cried out to the old fisherman. He fought to turn the boat toward her. She swam, kicking with all her might, battling the powerful waves that sought to hurl her back against the rocks. A tremendous undertow kept pulling her head underwater, trying to take her down to the depths. She swallowed more and more water till she felt her belly was full of it. At last she reached the boat, and the boatman reached for her. She stuck out her hand and felt the old man's grip, powerful from decades hauling up nets full of fish, take her other wrist and yank her out of the water. Halima clambered into the boat and knelt on all fours, stomach heaving as she vomited up sea-water. Then, still reeling, she lurched to the side of the vessel to look for a sign of Madongo and her husband. At first, all she saw were black crashing waves and white frothy foam. Then she spotted them. Madongo clung with one arm to a jagged boulder near the base of the cliffs. The other brawny arm was locked around the giant's neck, barely keeping his face out of the ocean. Tall waves slammed over the boulder, threatening to rip the warrior's arm from its socket. Again and again the pair would vanish under the waves, but always the head of faithful Madongo would reappear. Halima pointed them out to the old man. He handed her an oar, and together they struggled to guide the boat toward the boulder. Halima had never used an oar before. She'd only lain idly in barges while her father's servants took her out on jaunts for her amusement. But her determination to reach her husband taught her quickly. She stabbed the water again and again with all her might, till her slim arms ached. At last they pulled alongside the boulder. Madongo, groaning with effort, pushed the giant up, as Halima and the boatman each grabbed one elongated arm and pulled as hard as they could. The small boat turned halfway over, nearly capsizing from its weight, and a rush of cold water ran into the craft. Shamari slid like a huge elephant seal onto the floor of the boat. Waves crashed against the hull, threatening to splinter the fragile reed boat against the rocks. Madongo braced his feet against the boulders and shoved off, sending the boat careening away from the rocks. Agile as ever, he sprang into the boat and ripped the oar from Halima's hand. He and the old man began to paddle frantically against the surf to get the boat clear from the rocks. "We must raise the sail!" the old man cried in a voice barely audible over the surf. Madongo pointed to the palace wall overlooking the cliffs. "The guards would see us!" he yelled back. "We must, son, or be crushed like egg cells." Madongo nodded fearfully. As he and the old man backpedaled furiously, Madongo yelled to Halima, "Princess, you must hoist the sail." Halima crawled to the mast. Blinded by waves that splashed across her face, she felt for the rope to raise the sail. Using all her strength, she untied it. The sail slowly unfurled. Now the boat glided away from the cliffs and across the open water. Halima gave a sigh of relief and knelt beside her husband. "Princess, this is Nima's father, Chinua," Madongo said. The old man, who was wrinkled by the sun like a raisin, smiled at her, revealing a mouth checkered with missing teeth. "Thank you, father of my friend," Halima said. From the cliffs, a horn blew. In a moment, the cliffs were lined with tiny figures that at this distance looked like crows on a clothesline. "Row!" Madongo shouted at the old man. The two dug their oars deep into the water as spears and arrows rained down on them. Halima threw herself on her husband, shielding him. "If this is the end of our journey, let this be how we shall be found," she thought. Arrows screamed through the air and splashed into the water like some hellish black rain. Thunk! One smashed into the bow beside Halima's head. Thunk! 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 Badongo howled in pain as a dart hurtled into his thigh, but biting his lip, the burly warrior continued to pull out to sea with the help of the wiry old man. The arrows rained down around the boat like hungry gulls diving into the sea for fish. Halima lay over her husband, her eyes closed in terror, until the sounds diminished and became gentle, far-off plunks, more like bird droppings plopping into the water. Finally, they were beyond the range of the city wall. Halima sat up. The old man was panting like a dog, as if his sturdy old heart might now suddenly give out. With a grimace, Badongo wrenched the arrow from his thigh and hurled it away. She inched forward on her hands and knees on the rocking boat, unwound her soaking head wrap, and wound it around the warrior's broad thigh to staunch the bleeding. "Are we safe?" Halima asked him. Badongo shook his head. "Their boats will be after us." With bloody hands, he gripped the paddle and started pulling through the water vigorously. The old man sucked in a deep breath of salty air and followed suit. Halima looked anxiously over her shoulder and could see behind them what looked like a dot in the ocean. Then she realized it was a longboat with 24 oarsmen armed with spears. The loud beat of the drum set their pace. "They're coming!" she shrieked. Badongo and the old fisherman threw all their strength into their paddling, taking long, deep strokes that sent the boat skimming across the water. But behind them, powered by the backs of more than 20 strong black warriors, the vessel of the enemy shot through the water like a shark. They were roaring a chant in the language of the people of the snake. "We are the sons of the snake. Feed us and live, but tread on us and perish. We are the sons of the snake. Against us none can prevail, for we will rule eternal." Halima could see that at the head of the craft was the king's snake-eyed henchman, Masamakali. His sharp teeth gleamed with an evil grin of triumph as the long boat bore down on them. Nima's father panted heavily now, a raspy wheeze of a man about to keel over dead. He stopped paddling, and the boat skated gently along the surface, slowing to nearly a dead stop. The wind died for a moment, and the boat spiraled about in a slow, purposeless circle. Badongo looked around in wild desperation like a cornered rodent. "We're doomed," Halima thought. "But not to capture. No, not to capture." She knelt beside her husband, who lay still as death at the bottom of the boat, the faint glow of life ebbing from him. She touched his ice-cold cheek tenderly. "Wherever you are bound, Shamari, I am with you," she said. She called to Badongo as she snuck his short iron sword from its leather scabbard. She held it before him. "Badongo, do not let them take us alive." Badongo shook his head in horror. "I knelt at your father's feet and swore to protect you." "There is no hope, my friend," she insisted. Badongo looked about frantically and pointed with excitement to a set of rocks in the distance. The pair of immense boulders jutted out of the water just a few yards apart. Between the boulders, a forbidding torrent of waves smashed and swirled chaotically. "There!" he gasped. The old man protested. "We'll be crushed fine as flour." Badongo turned to Halima. "A small boat could make it. There is our hope, Princess." Halima nodded. "For the rocks," she ordered. "Let it be our salvation or damnation." The old man gritted his teeth, and he and Badongo threw their last morsel of strength into a headlong dash for the boulders. The enemy vessel had pulled up behind them, just 2 boat lengths to the rear. The bare-chested warriors aboard were already cheering and proclaiming victory. Halima saw that their pursuers were veering away from the rocks, planning to catch them on the other side. She stood straight up in the rocking boat. "Jackals! Are you not men enough to follow us?" she hollered at them at the top of her small lungs. Her taunt gave new vigor to her young pursuers. They veered back and put such force into their strokes that their boat was within an arm's reach of them when Chinwa's little craft reached the gap between the rocks. "Get down, Princess. This will be close," Badongo warned. Halima crouched down, huddling against Shumari's stiff form as if his frigid body could still protect her. Madongo began muttering a fervent prayer as Nima's father guided the craft so that the bow dove precisely midway between the boulders. The boat rocked left, then right, nearly tipping over in either direction. Shamari's immense body almost rolled out of the boat, taking Halima with it. As the boat rocketed through the gap, she raised her head and saw a jagged black rock passing a nose hair away. She screamed in terror, but she was not alone. Madongo and the old man let go of their manly pride and took up her fearful scream. Ah! They turned into a warrior's whoop of joy as the boat leapt safely through the perilous gap and into the open sea. Halima twisted back to see the longboat of their pursuers shoot between the boulders behind them. The warriors of the snake cried out, a high-pitched battle cry, like the screams of an eagle descending on its prey. The swirling current twisted the longboat so that its bow arched into the air. The vessel cracked against the rocks and split in half like a twig. The war cry of the oarsmen turned into squeals of utter terror and panic as they spilled headlong into the water. Halima shut her eyes, while the roaring waves snuffed out their cries. The wind carried Halima's own tiny vessel out to sea, as the warriors, thrashing about the ocean like drowning ants, grew smaller and smaller. Madongo, who was watching grimly, said, "May the Great One in the sky have mercy on them." The boat sailed along the coast until darkness settled on the sea, and the sky above turned gray as slate. Halima lay, rocked as in a cradle by the gentle waves. As the boat sailed serenely across the moonlit sea, Halima slept with her head on her husband's clammy chest. Suddenly she realized something was wrong and sat up in alarm. "I can't hear his heart any more," she cried. Chinua, who'd been manning the till as Madongo dozed, crouched down beside her. The deep eyes of Shamari stared unseeing as the brilliant round moon. The fisherman said in a hushed tone, "He is at the threshold between life and death, Princess. 1 foot on this side of the river, and the other in the land of shadows." Halima fought panic. "What can we do?" she demanded. Said the father of Nima, "I am an old man. I have seen many pass across the river, and none return." Halima shook her head. "He will come back for me." Madongo was awake now, too, and knelt beside her. "Call him," he suggested. "Call him back." Halima knelt in the boat, cradling her husband's head in her lap. As gently she sang, "Leave me tomorrow, love. Do not ford the river. Lend me one night, love. Stay, love, stay." Tears rolled down her cheeks. It was an old sappy song Halima had heard 1,000 times, only now did its meaning ring clear. Halima felt a gentle tug on her fingers and looked down to see Shamari's hands gripping hers. His eyes, too, were brimming with tears. "He is returned," said Chinua, looking up at the sea of stars in amazement. "Praise to the Great One in the sky. Praise to the Rain-Giver."